The atmosphere inside the palace meeting room was calm, almost unnaturally quiet. Then a single statement changed everything. King Charles looked around the room before speaking with measured confidence. "I have complete trust in William and Catherine. Their judgment is dependable, and their commitment to the monarchy is beyond question." No one immediately reacted. Instead, silence settled over the room as everyone tried to understand the significance of those carefully chosen words. According to this imagined scenario, the king's announcement signaled a major shift in the royal family's future, placing Prince William and Catherine at the center of its leadership while leaving Queen Camilla with a greatly reduced role. For Camilla, it felt less like an administrative decision and more like a deeply personal loss. She remained perfectly still, her hands folded tightly together. She offered no objection, but the quiet around her seemed heavier than any argument could have been. King Charles never raised his voice. His calm delivery made the moment feel even more emotional, as though every sentence had been considered long before the meeting began. The gathering had started as a routine discussion among senior members of the royal household. Meetings like these are often used to discuss important matters affecting the monarchy before official announcements are made. Yet, in this imagined version of events, the discussion quickly became one of the most emotional moments of Charles's reign. The king understood that leadership inside the monarchy is about far more than titles. It involves public responsibility, influence, and the confidence of both the institution and the people it serves. By placing William and Catherine at the center of future decision-making, he was preparing the next generation to carry more of the monarchy's burden. For Prince William, the announcement was far from a celebration. He lowered his eyes, showing little sign of triumph. The future king appeared thoughtful rather than victorious, fully aware that greater authority also meant greater responsibility. Every important decision would now be examined more closely than ever before. Beside him, Catherine remained composed. Her calm expression reflected the steady image that has earned her widespread public respect. Even so, she understood that any increase in her influence would inevitably be compared with the changing role of Camilla. That realization made the moment feel less like a victory and more like an enormous responsibility. Camilla eventually looked toward the king, perhaps hoping for reassurance or an explanation that would soften the announcement. In this fictional scene, however, none came. Charles had already made his decision, and the silence that followed spoke louder than any additional words. One question seemed to linger in everyone's mind. Why now? Why would such a significant transition happen at this particular moment? The answer, at least in this imagined narrative, was not about personal feelings alone. It reflected the belief that every monarchy must eventually prepare for the future. Leadership cannot remain unchanged forever, and difficult choices sometimes become unavoidable. Each person in the room carried a different emotional burden. Charles faced the conflict between duty and personal loyalty. William accepted responsibility that arrived through family tension rather than celebration. Catherine recognized that public expectations of her would only continue to grow. Camilla confronted the painful possibility of seeing her influence fade after years of standing beside the king. No one appeared entirely comfortable with the outcome. A senior palace aide quietly closed a leather folder, the soft sound echoing through the silent room. It marked the end of the discussion, but not the end of its consequences. Every person present understood that decisions affecting the monarchy rarely end when a meeting concludes. Instead, they continue to shape relationships, public perception, and the institution itself for years to come. Whether viewed as a dramatic fictional scenario or a symbolic reflection on leadership and succession, one truth remains constant: within the royal family, every shift in responsibility carries both privilege and sacrifice, and every new chapter begins with difficult choices that affect everyone involved. The leather folder resting on the polished table represented far more than paperwork. It symbolized preparation, careful planning, and a decision that had clearly been made long before anyone entered the room. As the senior members of the household sat in silence, Prince William realized something unsettling. This was not simply a king choosing between family members. In this fictional scenario, unseen pressures had led King Charles to a decision that would reshape the future of the monarchy. The more William reflected on the announcement, the more convinced he became that the turning point had not happened that morning. It had started weeks earlier during a private family gathering at Windsor Castle, a dinner that few outside the royal household would ever know about, but one that everyone present would remember. Royal families, like any family, often experience defining moments that only become significant in hindsight. They are rarely loud or dramatic when they happen. Instead, they quietly alter relationships until nothing feels the same again. According to this imagined story, the Windsor dinner had originally been organized to discuss the future responsibilities of senior royals as King Charles gradually prepared the monarchy for the years ahead. It was intended to reassure everyone that the institution remained united. Instead, it exposed hidden divisions. As conversation turned toward the future, Camilla questioned Catherine's expanding role within the family. Her words sounded polite on the surface, but those gathered around the table sensed a deeper meaning. She wondered whether Catherine's influence had grown too quickly and whether William should already be taking on responsibilities that traditionally belonged to the reigning monarch. No one interrupted. The room became unusually quiet. Catherine listened without raising her voice. She neither defended herself nor challenged Camilla directly. Remaining composed required remarkable self-control, but she understood that arguing would only deepen the tension. Her silence carried its own quiet strength, leaving everyone else to draw their own conclusions. William felt a surge of emotion but resisted the urge to respond. His first instinct was to defend his wife, yet he also recognized that the future king could not afford to appear driven by anger. Instead, he chose restraint over confrontation. That decision spoke louder than any heated argument could have. King Charles watched the exchange carefully. He noticed relatives avoiding eye contact, conversations fading into uncomfortable silence, and the atmosphere growing heavier with every passing second. The discussion had revealed something far more serious than a disagreement between individuals. It had exposed the possibility of competing centers of influence within the monarchy. After the dinner ended, the fictional narrative imagines Princess Anne speaking privately with the king. She reportedly warned him that disagreements could always be managed, but divided leadership would eventually weaken the institution itself. A monarchy depended on clarity, unity, and public confidence. If competing voices continued pulling in different directions, the damage could become impossible to repair. Whether those words alone influenced Charles or simply confirmed concerns he already carried, the dinner remained fixed in his memory. Weeks later, those concerns appeared to shape the announcement that stunned everyone in the meeting room. When the formal gathering concluded, Charles asked everyone to leave except Camilla. For the first time that day, there were no advisors, officials, or future monarchs present, only husband and wife. A formal document rested on the table between them, outlining the imagined changes to ceremonial responsibilities and internal family leadership. Yet the document itself was not the true source of pain. The silence between them carried far greater weight. Camilla searched Charles's face, hoping he might soften his decision or suggest that there was still room for compromise. Instead, the king remained calm, though the sadness in his expression suggested the choice had come at a personal cost. Finally, Camilla asked the question that had been building since the announcement. Had the family decided she no longer belonged? Her voice remained steady at first, but emotion gradually broke through. Charles lowered his eyes before answering, a brief pause that hurt more than an immediate response ever could. In this fictional account, he explained that the decision was not intended as punishment. Rather, he believed the monarchy needed a single, consistent direction as it prepared for the future. Camilla disagreed. She suggested that William and Catherine had benefited from the collapse of the old order and now stood ready to inherit influence that once belonged elsewhere. Charles rejected that interpretation. He insisted that William had shown restraint when confrontation would have been easier and that Catherine had responded with dignity instead of seeking personal advantage. Neither, he argued, had asked for another person's humiliation. The real challenge, he said, was protecting the monarchy itself. For too many years, private disagreements had threatened to become public controversies. Future generations, Charles believed, deserved a stronger and more stable institution than the one shaped by lingering rivalries and divided loyalties. The conversation eventually reached its natural conclusion. Charles reached toward his pen, hesitated, and gently placed it back beside the document without writing another word. The gesture said everything. Nothing else remained to negotiate. As the palace adjusted to the imagined changes, Catherine quietly accepted the responsibilities now placed before her. She never celebrated the shift in authority because she understood that leadership gained during another person's pain could never feel like victory. Later, William found her standing alone in a palace corridor. She quietly admitted that many people would believe she had somehow won. William answered softly that duty rarely feels like winning. More often, it arrives carrying responsibilities no one truly seeks. Together, they recognized that public expectations would only become greater from that moment forward. Meanwhile, Charles explained to senior members of the household that his objective was never to divide the family but to strengthen its future. The monarchy, in his view, required one clear direction, one stable public image, and one united leadership team capable of guiding the institution through the challenges ahead. Whether history would judge the decision as wise or controversial remained uncertain, but inside the palace, everyone understood that the balance of responsibility had changed forever. And with that change came new expectations, new sacrifices, and a future none of them could fully predict. The decision no longer existed only as words spoken inside a private meeting. It had begun to reshape the daily life of the palace. In this fictional scenario, King Charles had quietly requested a formal transition plan several days before making his announcement, making it clear that the changes were the result of careful preparation rather than an emotional reaction. William slowly realized that the process had been unfolding behind the scenes while everyone else still believed there was time to repair old tensions. The effects became visible almost immediately. Internal schedules were updated, ceremonial plans were revised, and future planning documents reflected a new structure. Catherine noticed the changes without celebration, while William read the revised papers in thoughtful silence. Both understood that the shift in responsibility had become real. For Camilla, however, the following morning proved even more painful than the announcement itself. She entered her office expecting the familiar routine of meetings, briefings, and official responsibilities. Instead, she found a room that felt strangely unfamiliar. A chair had been removed from the planning table. Her name no longer appeared on several future schedules, and responsibilities she once expected to carry had quietly disappeared. The changes were no longer symbolic. They had become part of the palace's everyday routine. When a junior aide handed her the updated documents, the brief hesitation before speaking revealed everything. No harsh words were exchanged, yet the silence carried its own message. Camilla accepted the papers with dignity, but each page reminded her that her role inside the family had been significantly reduced. Later that day, Charles learned how quickly the palace staff had adapted to the new arrangements. Though saddened by the personal consequences, he believed the transition had to be swift to avoid confusion within the institution. In his view, clear leadership was essential, even when difficult decisions carried emotional costs. William received the revised family authority records shortly afterward. As he reviewed the documents, he saw Camilla's influence reduced across several areas of palace planning. Rather than feeling victorious, he appeared burdened, realizing that his own growing responsibilities had arrived alongside another family member's loss. Nearby, Catherine noticed an empty place on a seating plan. She quietly asked those around her not to speak unkindly about the situation, believing that even in moments of great change, dignity and compassion should never be forgotten. Catherine's quiet request changed the atmosphere inside the room. She believed true strength was not measured by another person's defeat, but by the compassion shown afterward. In this fictional story, although Camilla had lost influence within the royal household, Catherine refused to let that loss become a source of humiliation. Respect, she believed, should survive even when authority changes hands. That belief led to a private meeting unlike any other. There were no advisors, no palace officials, and no members of the royal family standing between them. No carefully prepared statements softened the conversation. It was simply Catherine and Camilla, face to face. Without ceremony or protection, Catherine entered the small sitting room alone, fully aware that Camilla might see her as the living symbol of everything she believed had been taken away. Camilla remained seated, her expression marked by disappointment rather than anger. For a long moment, titles seemed to disappear, leaving only two women carrying very different burdens. Catherine had requested the meeting after witnessing how quickly palace life had adjusted to the imagined changes. She understood that losing responsibility was painful enough without allowing others to turn it into public embarrassment. This conversation was not about official decisions. It was about dignity. Camilla broke the silence first. She asked Catherine whether she had come to witness her defeat. The question carried years of emotion beneath its calm delivery. Catherine did not react defensively. She understood why Camilla felt cornered. After all, one woman's growing influence had coincided with another woman's declining role. Speaking softly, Catherine explained that she had not come to celebrate anyone's loss. She had come because humiliation should never become entertainment, even within palace walls. Her words were simple, but they changed the mood between them. Camilla looked away before finally admitting what had truly troubled her. It was not public criticism that frightened her most. It was the feeling of no longer belonging within the family she had spent years standing beside. The responsibilities of royal life had always been demanding, but the thought of becoming unwanted by those closest to her felt far more painful than losing any official title. Catherine listened carefully. She recognized that beneath Camilla's frustration was grief. Influence had given her confidence and purpose, and losing it left an emptiness that no formal explanation could erase. Although Catherine made no promises about reversing the fictional decision or changing William's future responsibilities, she offered one assurance: she would never allow Camilla to become the subject of ridicule within the family. Authority, she believed, should never require cruelty. Camilla offered no words of gratitude, yet the silence between them softened. For the first time since the announcement, understanding replaced accusation. Outside the palace, however, events were unfolding very differently. By the following morning, private conversations had become public headlines. Newspapers and broadcasters portrayed the imagined changes as a dramatic shift in the monarchy's future. One front page featured Charles alongside William and Catherine, while Camilla appeared isolated beneath the headline. The power shift. Crowds gathered outside the palace, not in celebration but in quiet curiosity. The story had become larger than the people involved. When Camilla saw the newspaper, she studied the photograph for a moment before turning it over without a word. The image spoke for itself, reducing a deeply personal situation to a single public symbol. William watched the media coverage with mixed emotions. Although many commentators described the announcement as a sign that the monarchy's future now rested firmly with him and Catherine, he found little comfort in the praise. Public approval gained through another person's pain did not feel like victory. He understood that leadership often comes with difficult sacrifices, and that every step toward the future could leave someone else looking back at what had been lost. In the end, the greatest challenge would not be accepting greater responsibility, but carrying it with compassion, humility, and respect for everyone affected by the change. As the imagined crisis unfolded, Catherine became the figure everyone watched most closely. She never mocked Camilla, never celebrated her reduced role, and never encouraged the whispers circulating through the palace. That quiet restraint shaped how others viewed the situation. While the surrounding drama grew louder, Catherine remained calm, composed, and focused on duty. She understood that true leadership was measured not only by authority, but by the grace shown in difficult moments. King Charles carefully reviewed the official palace statement before allowing it to be released. Every sentence had been chosen with precision. The message avoided blame and emotional language, yet it made one point unmistakably clear: The changes within the royal household were intended to be permanent, rather than criticizing Camilla or excessively praising William and Catherine. The statement simply presented the new structure as the monarchy's path forward. When Camilla heard the announcement, she understood what it truly meant. The decision was no longer temporary or open to discussion. In this fictional story, the center of influence had shifted, and William and Catherine now stood at the heart of the family's future. As public attention slowly settled, the headlines became less important than the lasting impact of the decision itself. The imagined turning point was remembered not as the day someone lost influence, but as the moment the monarchy chose continuity over comfort. Charles accepted the burden of making a painful choice. William accepted greater responsibility without treating it as a victory. Catherine carried her new role with humility instead of triumph, while Camilla faced the emotional cost of seeing a familiar chapter come to an end. Charles understood that protecting the institution sometimes required deeply personal sacrifices. His decision reshaped the family's internal structure, not simply by changing titles, but by defining who would guide the monarchy through future challenges. Though convinced he had acted in the institution's best interests, he also recognized the personal pain that accompanied those choices. William embraced his responsibilities with quiet determination, believing that leadership begins not when power is received, but when it is exercised with wisdom and restraint. Catherine reflected the same principle. She refused to let another person's disappointment become an opportunity for revenge, proving that compassion could exist alongside authority. In the end, this fictional story concludes with a simple message: lasting leadership is not built through spectacle or personal victory. It is built through stability, dignity, and difficult decisions. Every member of the family carried a different burden, and each paid a price for the future that had been chosen. Whatever history might eventually remember, the greatest lesson remained that true strength is measured not by power alone, but by the mercy shown while holding it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next video.